Marcus Webb
Please
had
let us
learned
in, we
early
have
that the
nowhere else to
quietest
go.
people in
You
any
shouldn't have
room
come
were
back
usually
here.
the most dangerous to underestimate. Not dangerous in the way that required physical threat, dangerous in the way that required recalibration, the way a situation you thought you understood reveals itself to have dimensions you failed to account for because you were too busy constructing your own version of events to examine the actual one. He had learned this lesson himself, in a different context, and had filed it permanently. He was 42, a single father of two, living in a modest house in Columbus, Ohio that he had bought with 12 years of careful saving and that he maintained with the particular pride of a man who understood what things cost because he had counted every dollar that went into them. His daughter Zoe was 14, thoughtful and precise. His son Calvin was 11, loud in the best possible way, the kind of child who made every room aware of his presence without any malicious intent, simply the natural consequence of his enthusiasm for existing. Their mother had left 6 years ago, not in crisis but in the quiet, definitive way of someone who had decided on a different life and pursued it without particular cruelty and without particular consideration for what she was leaving behind. Marcus had not spent significant energy on bitterness about this. He had spent his energy on Zoe and Calvin, which was the more useful investment, and the returns had been what he had put into them, which was everything. He worked as a senior operations manager at a regional logistics company called Crestline Distribution, where he had spent 9 years earning a reputation for solving problems that other people escalated and for remaining specifically, reliably calm in situations that rewarded calm and punished noise. He was not known for talking about himself. He was known for doing his job and going home to his children and being, in the estimation of everyone who worked with him, one of the most genuinely solid people any of them had encountered. What he was not known for, because he had never had occasion to demonstrate it at Crestline, was anything that existed before his 9 years there. The situation began on a Wednesday afternoon. The new regional director had arrived 3 weeks prior from the company's Dallas headquarters. Her name was Pamela Sears, 45, with the specific confidence of someone who had been brought in with a mandate and understood that mandate is permission to rearrange everything in the image of her previous successes regardless of whether the context warranted it. She had spent 3 weeks restructuring, reassigning, and delivering assessments of the existing team with the kind of authority that was mostly volume and was missing the foundational knowledge that gives volume any weight. She had decided, in her 3 weeks, that Marcus was a problem. Not based on his work, which was objectively strong. Based on his manner, the quiet, the economy of words, the absence of performed enthusiasm for her changes. She had interpreted his calm as resistance and his efficiency as a threat to her authority, which was the particular cognitive error of leaders who confused compliance with competence. She had called him into her office 3 times in 2 weeks for what she framed as performance conversations that were actually dominance establishment in a thin professional disguise, and Marcus had attended all 3 with the same even temperament he brought to everything, which seemed to irritate her more than any pushback would have. The Wednesday meeting was the 4th. This time she was not alone. She had the company's regional HR representative, a younger man named Todd who had the uncomfortable energy of someone who had been told to be present without being told exactly why, and she had a printed document in front of her that purported to be a performance improvement plan for Marcus Webb, Senior Operations Manager, 9-year employee, whose actual performance metrics were in the 91st percentile of his peer group. Marcus sat across from her and looked at the document she slid across the desk and read it with the careful attention he gave to documents and said nothing immediately. "I think this is a fair assessment," Pamela said, with the tone of someone who has decided the verdict before convening the court. "There are concerns about your engagement level, your responsiveness to new leadership initiatives, and frankly your attitude in team settings." Marcus looked up from the document. "Which team settings specifically? Your overall demeanor communicates a lack of support for the direction I'm taking this division." "I've completed every directive on schedule and above standard," he said. "Do you have a specific performance concern?" Pamela leaned back with the small, dismissive smile of someone who had decided this was going to go the way she had planned it and was mildly entertained by the delay. "You can disagree all you want, Marcus. But this is a formal process and I have the full support of Dallas behind it. You can call whoever you want." She gestured at his phone with a casualness that was designed to convey that the offer was meaningless. "Call whoever you think is going to change this outcome." Todd shifted in his chair. Marcus looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at the performance improvement plan and the signature line at the bottom that was waiting for his name. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and took out his phone. Pamela watched him do this with the patient condescension of someone who was certain of the outcome. "Go ahead," she said. He found the contact. He pressed call. He put the phone on the desk between them on speaker because he had nothing to hide and because he believed in transparency, and he waited for it to connect. It rang twice. The voice that answered was not an assistant. It was not a receptionist or a gatekeeper or any intermediary layer. It was direct and immediate, and it said, "Marcus. It's been a while." Pamela's expression did not change yet because the voice was not yet identified. "It has," Marcus said. "I'm sorry to call during business hours. I have a situation I wanted to make you aware of." "Tell me." "I'm sitting in a meeting with the new regional director at Crestline, Pamela Sears, and the HR representative. I've been presented with a performance improvement plan. My metrics are in the 91st percentile for my peer group. I've been with the company 9 years without a formal concern. I wanted to make sure someone with appropriate oversight was aware of the situation before I signed anything." A brief pause. Then, "Put her on." Marcus looked at Pamela and said, "He'd like to speak with you." Pamela reached for the phone with the slightly uncertain movement of someone who still didn't know who she was reaching for and whose confidence was beginning to run a brief diagnostic on itself. "This is Pamela Sears," she said, in her director voice, professional and positioned. "Ms. Sears." The voice was even and unhurried. "This is Robert Calloway. I'm the CEO of Crestline Distribution. I'm going to ask you to set the document in front of you aside for the moment and walk me through the specific performance data that generated it." The color that left Pamela Sears's face did not leave gradually. It left the way water leaves a glass that has been tipped, completely, and in the amount of time it takes to tip a glass. Todd looked at the desk. Marcus looked at the window. The conversation that followed lasted 11 minutes. Marcus did not speak during most of it. Robert Calloway asked specific questions in the way of someone who had been running a large company for long enough to know exactly which questions revealed the architecture of a situation and which answers revealed the architect. Pamela provided answers that became less confident and more qualified as the questions became more specific, which is what happens when the performance of authority is examined by the actual article. When the call ended, the office was quiet for a moment. Pamela set the phone on the desk with the careful deliberateness of someone performing composure. "How do you know Robert Calloway?" she said. Her voice was its professional self, but the foundation under it was different now. Marcus picked up his phone and put it back in his jacket pocket. "He was my commanding officer," he said. 82nd Airborne. I served under him for 6 years before he transitioned to the private sector." He looked at the performance improvement plan on the desk between them. "I don't mention my service record at work because it isn't relevant to my job performance." He paused. "Usually." He stood up. "I'll be at my desk if there's anything operations related that needs attention," he said to the room generally. "Todd, I hope the rest of your afternoon is less complicated than this part was." Todd nodded with the expression of a man who had just witnessed something he would be describing to people for several years. Marcus walked back to his desk and sat down and returned to the logistics report he had been working on before the meeting, because the report still needed finishing and the deadline was tomorrow morning, and the meeting, whatever else it had been, had not changed that. Zoe called at 4:30, the way she called every day at 4:30 because that was the system they had, and asked if he was okay because she said he had sounded different when he texted at lunch. "I had a meeting," he said. "Good meeting or bad meeting?" He thought about Robert Calloway's voice on speaker in a quiet office and Pamela Sears's face and Todd's expression in the performance improvement plan that had been slid back across the desk and was not, as of 4:30, a document anyone was discussing further. "Clarifying," he said. Zoe accepted this with the easy trust of someone who had been given enough consistent honesty to not require elaboration when it wasn't offered. "Calvin made a volcano in the kitchen," she said. "Of course he did," Marcus said. "I'll be home by 6. He finished the report. He drove home. The kitchen had, in fact, been volcanoed, though Calvin had made a genuine and partially successful effort to address the aftermath, which Marcus recognized as character development and chose to emphasize over the continued evidence of baking soda on the ceiling. He made dinner. They ate together. The evening was ordinary in every direction, which was the kind of ordinary Marcus had spent 12 years building on purpose, and it held, the way things hold when they are built on the right foundation. He did not tell them about the meeting. Some things were just for him to carry, because he was the dad, and some things the dad carried alone, and that was fine, and he was fine, and when Calvin asked him at bedtime if he had a good day, he said yes without any qualification, because it was true in every way that the day had eventually arrived at, and that was what mattered. Yes, he had a very good day.